Hello. Today, or whenever you watch this, I'll be taking you through the process of assembling a Haulmaster 1,720-pound payload folding utility trailer from Harbor Freight. We had originally chosen the lighter weight 4x8 trailer, but they were out of stock. This one was only $30 more and available, so we decided to upgrade. We bought this trailer to use with a Mazda 2 hatchback, which is definitely not a utility vehicle. Having a trailer allows us to haul a lot more items like building materials and sports gear, and makes loading and unloading them much easier. There are 5 main reasons we chose to buy a trailer from Harbor Freight. Cost. It's much less expensive than pre-built and specialized trailers or similar mail-order kit trailers. Size. With a 4x8-foot deck and overall length of 11.5 feet, the trailer is big enough to carry sheet goods and other building materials or gear such as kayaks, all without being cumbersome to tow and store. Weight. The car only has a Class 1 receiver, so even the heavier duty trailer falls within the allowable weight ratings. Convenience. We were able to purchase and pick up the trailer locally, along with many of the needed accessories, avoiding shipping costs and delays. Reviews. There are many positive reviews and videos posted by people who have been using these trailers for years, for a host of different purposes. The trailer comes in 2 boxes. Box 1 is 4.5 inches tall, 16.5 inches wide, and 64 inches long. Box 2 is 12 inches tall, 28.5 inches wide, and 25.5 inches long. Box 1 weighs 172 pounds, and Box 2 weighs 104 pounds. Box 1 was too long to fit inside the car and too heavy for the roof rack. We placed Box 2 in the car unopened, then opened Box 1 and placed the individual parts inside the car. Fortunately, the only part as long as the box is the axle, so we were able to position it between the seats. I then used a ratchet strap to secure the empty box to the roof rack. I expected the structural pieces to be mildly flexible prior to assembly, but found them to be a heavy gauge for such a light trailer. The hardware is good quality, and most of the nuts are nylon locking nuts. The paint is consistent and appears durable, although I understand it tends to fade to a pinkish mauve color over the years, not unlike our formerly red hand truck. Other than the electrical portion, the instructions are easy to follow, although I found several minor errors which I will point out. Keep in mind, the numbers in the text refer to the numbers on the illustrations, not the actual parts. The only parts that are physically labeled are the side rails, but everything was easy to identify. We verified all parts were present, including all 78 of the M10 by 20 bolts. I loosely threaded the nuts onto the appropriate bolts, which also made the assembly easier. There are 4 M10 by 25 carriage bolts for the spring carrier, and 4 M10 by 30 hex bolts. The tools needed for assembly include a ratchet or impact driver with a short extension and 17 mm socket, plus a 17 mm wrench or an adjustable wrench. These will fit the majority of the frame bolts and the U-bolts for the axle. You'll need an 11 mm socket or wrench for the taillight nuts, and a 19 mm socket and wrench for the leaf spring hanger bolts and the ball coupler. And don't forget a 19 mm deep socket or lug wrench for the lug nuts. You'll also need a No. 2 Phillips screwdriver, a torque wrench for the U-bolts and lug nuts, and a rubber mallet. Before I continue, I should apologize for the terrible camera framing and lighting. This was the only place I could set up my phone to record, so I centered the camera on the empty space and began the build in that area. Unfortunately, I ended up with the trailer too far back for the main assembly. Even so, I made this video to show how simple it can be to assemble these trailers and offer a few tips to improve the build experience. I started the build with the frame upside down to avoid turning it over multiple times. This is also easier due to the tabs for the tow bars on the underside of the front crossmember. If you have trouble visualizing the parts upside down, lay out the parts right side up first and then turn them over. After loosely bolting the two subframes, I placed them on the two halves of box 1 to avoid scratching the paint. I squared the two sections and tightened the bolts, making adjustments as needed with the rubber mallet. I tightened the top bolts first to ensure the difference between the top of the rails and crossmembers remained consistent. Then I tightened the bottom bolts. With the two subframes assembled, I set up 6 cinder blocks with cleaning towels and placed the frames on top. Since we chose not to fold the trailer, I joined the two subframes using 4 bolts and left off the hinges. Here is where I discovered the first error in the instructions. They call for the tow bar brackets to be installed using 2 M10 by 30 bolts each, but I knew the leaf spring hangers required 2 of the 30mm bolts where they pass through 4 layers of metal, shown here. I installed the brackets using M10 by 20 bolts for the front holes and M10 by 30s for the rear, where there are 3 layers of metal. After installing the 2 tow bars, we discovered a second error in the instructions. The tow bars are connected at the front using 2 plates. The coupler base, which has 6 mounting holes, and a piece of channel welded to it onto which the coupler mounts, and the T-plate, which is flat and only has 4 mounting holes. As you can see in this illustration, they drew the T-plate with a coupler mount, but in other drawings it's correct. After installing the leaf spring hangers, I installed the fender brackets, but not the fenders. Next, I installed the springs using the front bolts through the eyelets only, then placed the axle on the springs, aligning the round tabs with the indentations. I installed the U-bolts hand-tight, then flipped the entire assembly forward to have better access to the U-bolt nuts. I torqued them to the required 15 foot-pounds and rotated the assembly back into place and installed the rear spring bolts. I removed both dust caps from the hubs with a flat screwdriver by working it around the gap carefully. I prefer this method since there is less chance of knocking out the bearing or damaging the cap and rear seal using a rod and hammer. I made sure the inside and outside bearings are full of grease and that there was plenty inside the hub assembly. If necessary, additional grease can be added using the Zerk fittings on the backside of the hubs. I installed the wheels and hub assemblies, making sure the spindle comes through the center without touching the bearing. If you let the bearings fall out, they will become contaminated by your hands closed in the floor. If that happens, they must be fully cleaned and repacked with new grease. I installed the washers and castle nuts, tightening them to fully seat the bearings, then backed off until the tires rotated freely, but not so much that they rocked on the spindles. I aligned the nearest notch with the hole in the spindle and inserted the cotter pin. Separate the 2 ends of the cotter pin and bend them back around the spindle so the pin can't come out and the dust cap fits over it. I reinstalled the dust caps by tapping around the edge with the rubber mallet. There are claims that these trailers only come with shipping grease. If the grease was meant to be replaced before use, the hubs would not come pre-assembled. Instead, the bearings would be oiled and wrapped in plastic or paper in a separate package. Since most people assemble and use the trailers as is, it would be a liability nightmare to pack them with temporary grease. I doubt it's a particularly heavy-duty grease, given the trailer's weight and speed rating, and probably not marine grease since they are not intended to be submerged. If you plan on putting a lot of highway miles on it with heavy loads, or using it for a boat trailer, I would suggest changing to an appropriate grease and installing submersible lights for the latter. This is where I finally turned the trailer right side up. I left the fenders off so I wouldn't damage them during the process. After checking the rolling resistance, the boss tested the tongue weight, and we both took a moment to admire the trailer. I installed the fenders, needing only a minor tweak to the left side bracket from flipping the trailer. I initially attached the coupler per the instructions, but ended up modifying it later. I'll cover that in more detail in a separate video. This is also where we found another minor error. There was no center link on the chain as stated in the instructions, making both halves the same length. I fished a piece of wire through the coupler plate and hooked the two centermost links, then pulled them past the forward bolt location. Next, I guided the bolt through the coupler as well as both links adjacent to the two center links. That made the two sides of the chain equal lengths and one link shorter overall to avoid dragging behind our small car. It also means the chain is attached by two links rather than one. I installed the taillight brackets and then the taillights. I was already aware of the wire routing issue on the amber side marker lights, so I corrected it before I began the trailer assembly. Doing so was simple since the base is a separate piece from the light and reflector assembly, which are sealed units. I took them apart and drilled holes in the center of the bases to line up with the holes in the trailer frame. The wiring will look different because I used the Kenway trailer wiring kit from Harbor Freight. I bought the kit to add lights to a hitch-mounted cargo carrier, but since it's heavier than the original wire, I decided to use it on the trailer. Regardless, the wiring process is the same. I installed rubber grommets in the end holes of the cross members, except the middle two since it was too thick. The original kit is known as a 4-way wishbone harness. That means it includes two brown wires for the tail and side marker lights as shown in this graphic from eTrailer. The kit I used has a brown and a red wire, but I used the red as a second brown. Green is for the right-hand brake and turn signal, and yellow is for the left-hand brake and turn signal. White is ground. Normally, the wiring kits have a short white wire that you attach to the front of the tongue and then ground the lights to the frame. Because these trailers are pre-painted, bolt-together kits designed to fold, they don't have good electrical continuity. In fact, poor grounding is a common lighting issue on many trailers. As such, I decided to run a ground wire to each light. That was another reason to use the Kenway kit, since it included a full-length ground wire. I fed the green and brown pair and the ground wire down the right side, and the yellow and red pair with the ground wire down the left side. I drilled holes in line with the wiring on the taillights, added a rubber grommet, and passed enough wire through to add extra heat shrink tubing. After making the solder connections, I pulled it taut to eliminate extra wire that might catch on something. I also added 2 layers of heat shrink where the wire passes through the middle crossbars since it's too thick for a grommet. After securing the wire to the frame, I cut all the wires at the front marker lights. I then determined the length of the connection whip and cut a piece of solid corrugated loom to fit over it. That is attached to the underside of the coupler plate using 2 insulated cable clamps and stainless steel bolts. The rubberized coating grips the loom, keeping it in place. I ran the green and brown pair and the ground wire along the right-hand tow bar, bypassing the tow bar saddle and pin block, then made a loop around the mounting bolt so the tongue can fold under. I installed UV-resistant nylon cable clamps as wire guides, positioning them to keep the wire away from standing water that might collect inside the box channels. I repeated the procedure for the left-hand side, but without the ground wire, only the yellow and red pair. To ground the left side, I used ring terminals to attach short ground pigtails to the front cross member. I then applied rubber tape to cover the gap between the loom and plug. Electrical tape is not suitable for this as the adhesive will eventually break down and come apart. It's also not temperature resistant nor waterproof. Here are the lights in all their glory. In spite of spinal cord and chronic fatigue issues slowing me down, This was a fairly easy trailer to assemble in only a few hours. I was able to install the wiring the following afternoon, again taking my time. The wiring instructions leave something to be desired, so if you're not comfortable with trailer wiring, seek assistance or watch a few tutorials. Contrary to some claims, these trailers are not junk, and when bolted together they are quite sturdy. The lights are basic but do the job, and breaking one won't cost an arm and a leg. The tires are Carlisle brand, and the wheels are pretty decent. If you need a compact, lightweight trailer for basic hauling, these are hard to beat. When we picked up the trailer, I also grabbed a 4-pin tester for the car wiring, a 2-inch ball, a coupler lock, a receiver lock, and dielectric grease to prevent corrosion and maintain good electrical contact. It also makes it easier to connect the plugs. All locks can be defeated, but having multiple locks and other deterrents adds time most thieves aren't willing to spend to steal your trailer. Other parts and accessories you might need are wheel chocks if you plan to park on a grade or work on the trailer when it's not connected to a vehicle, a tongue jack to hold the trailer level and make it easier to connect to the vehicle, ratchet straps to secure loads, and loading ramps for ATVs, motorcycles, or yard equipment. That'll do it for now. I'll post follow-up videos for other accessories and modifications, so look for those if they are not already available. Thanks for watching.